EA and single-player games, a tale as old as time. If EA had their way, straight up, traditional, non-live service, single-player games would cease to exist. In the past, EA executives have straight up said, single-player games are finished. This was Frank Gibeau back in 2010. And then in 2012, that same executive insisted that games are to be thought as services from here on out. And then during Andrew Wilson's tenure, the CFO Blake Jorgensen admitted that as we kept reviewing the game, the linear story-driven action-adventure Star Wars game that Visceral was making before their studio was shut down, it continued to look like a much more linear game which people don't like as much today as they did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. EA's stance on single-player games has been made abundantly clear time and time again, which is why this tweet right here was in very poor taste coming from Electronic Arts when they said back in June 30th, 2022, they're a 10, but they only like playing single-player games. Backlash against that tweet was swift and severe from the gaming community, from developers, from media outlets and content creators, hell, even from employees, including Vince Zampella, who is an EA executive and head of Respawn Entertainment, not to mention that a number of EA employees spoke to news outlet USA Today to discuss what happened internally, where following the tweet, EA is hosting roundtable discussions and meetings with executives, among them likely being Vince and Pella, who are angry since some studios saw the tweet as an insult to them. It was pointed out that the person managing EA social media isn't even somebody from EA. The social media manager was apparently outsourced, so they had no context for EA's history and why that tweet was in such bad taste. Sources also detailed how EA tried to do damage control by doubling down on self-deprecation, by asking their studio's social managers to reply by ridiculing and roasting the tweet in question, but many disagreed, saying that that would just feed into the big bad EA narrative. And when most agreed internally that the best way to approach this was just to take responsibility and earnestly apologize, EA instead came out with this tweet: "Roast well deserved. We'll take this L because playing single-player games actually makes them an 11. Tried to be like, hey, we're laughing together, when it's like, no, we're laughing at you. Not only does EA have a history of insisting that single-player games are done, but their multiplayer live service games have a history of, well, being crap. For example, here is Battlefield 2042. Look at the Metascore and the user score. Look at Anthem's Metascore and user score. Same thing for Star Wars Battlefront 2. And there's sports games. We've got Madden NFL 22. Not doing great here. Same with FIFA 21. The only recent exception that I can think of is Apex Legends, which has a very favorable Metascore, and that's because this was a game made by Respawn, one of few studios within EA that I'm hopeful about. They also made Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, are working on Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and also made the Titanfall series, which is renowned. Here's what kills me about all this: when EA allows developers to really stretch their wings and do whatever they want and make a proper linear experience or single-player experience, or in the case of It Takes Two, a co-op experience that's still overall linear and not a live service, you get scores like this. And beyond that, suddenly EA finds itself in a situation where one of their games actually won Game of the Year. Recall that It Takes Two won the award over plenty of prominent games. When EA actually sets their mind to making a fun, good video game, they tend to be able to succeed. Whereas when they focus on trying to make a monetization-driven live service, that's when game design gets corrupted by corporate intentions. Now, it seemed as though EA executives did eventually get wind of the backlash surrounding that single-player tweet, as recently, during the company's first quarter earnings call on Tuesday, EA CEO came out and kind of responded to the backlash surrounding that tweet. While it's not explicitly stated that they're addressing that specific tweet and the gaming community's reaction to it, it's abundantly clear that this statement came out because of the conversations that cropped up as a result of that tweet and EA's history with single-player games, what they had to say about them, and how they've treated studios who have tackled single-player games like Visceral, who were shut down because the kind of Star Wars project they were making was just deemed to be not in line with EA's goal of live servicifying everything. So here's a direct quote from EA CEO Andrew Wilson about single-player games and how they'll fit into EA's future Our players, on balance, they have these core motivations: inspiration, escape, social connection, competition, self-improvement, creation. These things that bring us together as players of games. Well, that all sounds honky-dory until you realize that EA games aren't made to inspire, to allow people to escape, for them to have social connections and fair competition and self-improvement and creation. You look at a game like FIFA and its Ultimate Team mode, that's there to extract as much money as possible from people that these kinds of games will prey against and will be most effective against, people who are susceptible to the psychological manipulations that loot boxes partake in order to keep people engaged for the long term and spending for the long term. But putting that aside, EA CEO Andrew Wilson says, and as we think about single-player games, we think it's a really, really important part of the overall portfolio that we deliver in the fulfillment of those core motivations. There's a more extensive version of this quote via IGN's coverage, which also features this quote: the way we think about this is really less about which game and more about which motivations these games fulfill. And this is the same quote featured by Polygon, followed by, and the telling of stories is really important in the fulfillment of some of those motivations. There is definitely a shift in tone right here. I don't think EA, as far as I can remember, has ever been this enthusiastic seeming about single-player games and their future in EA's portfolio. But Andrew Wilson straight up saying right here, we give them the utmost importance and we're going to keep doing them. And that's likely in part because when EA got back to making single-player games like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, they did really well. And then It Takes Two also did really well, on top of the fact that it won Game of the Year. And beyond that, outside of EA, plenty of single-player success stories, especially where PlayStation is concerned. They are among the best developers when it comes to AAA, campaign-driven, story-driven single-player experiences. And you know, they've been selling really well, and they've been critically acclaimed across the board. And it would seem as though EA is finally coming to the realization that single-player games are here to stay. I mean, sure, a successful live service has the potential to rake in more money, but even then, that's not guaranteed, especially when you look at EA's portfolio of failed live services like Battlefield 2042, which woefully underperformed both critically and commercially. Same thing for Anthem, which is now a dead game. Star Wars Battlefront 2, which saw its lifespan cut short, just as things were getting good too, just as tangible improvements were being made to the overall experience. But the flip side to that is that, unfortunately, as low of a score as games like Madden and FIFA get, these are still incredibly popular sports brands, and that's what draws people to purchase these games every year. Sports fans' love for the sports scene and its iconic players is what draws them to modes like Ultimate Team and compels them to collect the players that they desire. And that's how EA rakes in so much money. And the end result is that even with the questionable quality of these sports games, they're still some of the most profitable ventures for Electronic Arts and some of the most profitable and lucrative game releases in the games industry. And that's what corporate executives care about. It's not about how much happiness is their product bringing to gamers, how much are their products contributing to society and having a positive impact. It's about how do we make our bank account numbers go up as much as possible to keep investors happy. Which is why it should come as no surprise that this sentiment of how single-player games are really, really important, according to CEO Andrew Wilson, for the company's future, this sentiment was swiftly undercut by a follow-up statement by CFO Chris Suh, who said this: if we think about the model impact and the financial impact of it, I think the first thing to always keep in mind is that live services still encompass, on a trailing 12-month basis, over 70% of our business, which is the main thing they care about, not the artistry of making games or the enjoyment of gamers. It's about prioritizing the business at all costs, even if it comes at the expense of the psychological and financial health of customers. And that has been a proven, very reliable, highly recurring revenue stream, and that will still be the predominant driver in our P&L profit and loss long term. Our long-term growth will continue to invest in the ongoing stable performance of our live services business, and there will be some puts and takes along the way. Following up the single-player games are really, really important quote with something like this: that says that, but at the end of the day, 70% of our business and our revenue stream and the profits we make and all that is in live services, and they're the predominant driver in our profit and loss and yada, yada, yada. It just makes EA CEO's statement about single-player games being really, really important seem completely and utterly insincere. It's still abundantly clear that if EA had their way, if they didn't have to concern themselves with reputation and PR, they would 100% lean towards live services. To me, it feels like the only reason EA is greenlighting single-player projects is out of a sense of obligation, not because they're really passionate about them. I think the EA developers are passionate about making single-player games. I don't think EA executives are all too thrilled when they greenlight a single-player game. They just kind of do it because they feel like they have to maintain optics, because the perception surrounding EA and their stance on beloved single-player games has gotten so bad that they now feel like they have to start making up for that in order to create a more positive brand image for a company that is in lists of, the most hated companies in the games industry. But you know what? Even if it is out of a sense of obligation, hey, as long as EA is reminded that single-player games are very much viable and still very much some of the most beloved gaming experiences, and that they're never going to go away, and that EA should continue making single-player games. And when they make them, support them fully and allow full creative autonomy for the passionate studios. If pressure and a sense of we need to look a certain way in front of people is what's driving them to greenlight these single-player games, you know what? I don't care, as long as more of them keep getting made, because single-player games are freaking awesome. Even if Andrew Wilson comes off as insincere when he says that single-player games are really, really important, if EA feels pressured to make more single-player games, I see that as an absolute win. And look, hopefully they'll make good single-player games that'll be successful, and they'll be encouraged even from a business standpoint to be like, hey, you can actually find great financial success with single-player games like frickin' Elden Ring did. I mean, how many copies has that game sold at this point? I don't know, but initial sales numbers are overwhelmingly positive. I mean, this game is a smash hit, even compared to the numerous live services that are out there. I can guarantee you Elden Ring's made more money than Battlefield 2042 or Anthem or Star Wars Battlefront 2, and it's a single-player game. And I'm not saying it's easy to achieve a smash hit on the level of Elden Ring. What I am saying is that it is absolutely possible, and EA completely discounting single-player games as a highly profitable business venture, on top of the fact that it's just a beloved genre of games, is just stifling EA's ability to keep an open mind about single-player games and really go after creating a single-player masterpiece that will do Elden Ring numbers. It's absolutely possible. Single-player games are still thriving, and I hope EA finds business success, commercial success in their single-player releases so that executives will feel just as passionate about greenlighting and supporting single-player games as developers are about making them. And EA touts about how over 70% of their business is in live services, but it's not as if they've tried to offset that. It's not as if they've tried to make single-player games a bigger part of their business. Of course, the majority of your business will come from live services when the ship you're steering is mostly headed towards live services, when you're not greenlighting enough compelling single-player experiences, or when you're not trying to push the boundaries of what you can achieve with the single-player games genre. And that's what's compelling about live services to so many companies. It's more clear-cut to make an addictive monetization machine rather than a fun, unique, boundary-pushing game. At the end of the day, I think EA is far less thrilled about saying that single-player games are really, really important, and far more thrilled about pointing out that live services still encompass over 70% of our business. They're still dead set on this live service future, but at least there's an acknowledgement that they do plan to maintain single-player releases as part of their future, and we are seeing that in the form of Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I just hope there's more stuff like that coming from EA, because as I've said before, when EA actually tries and gives developers the autonomy and resources to really go balls to the walls with a single-player game they want to make, good results can absolutely happen. And that's the ideal outcome, more single-player success stories, so that more of those can coexist alongside EA's, live service ventures and whatnot. There's a future for both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But anyway, that's everything you need to know about Andrew Wilson's latest statement, walking back the tweet by highlighting the importance of single-player games. But I agree with Polygon when the article says that this sentiment is swiftly undercut by this statement right here, which isn't encouraging, but we'll see what the future holds for EA single-player games like Jedi Survivor. I really hope they knock that one out of the park. Or at least that's one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on EA's latest comment surrounding single-player games. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.